Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find exclusive programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Sulaiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. We begin with our top story in Somalia, where Al-Shabab militants laid siege on Hayat Hotel in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Armed attackers took control of the hotel in the Somali capital following 2 car bomb blasts and a gunfire, according to police and intelligence officers on Friday. Now, 2 car bombs targeted the hotel. One hit the barrier near the hotel, then the other hit the gate at the hotel. Now, the siege of a hotel ended after security forces stormed the building, killing the gunmen, according to officials, in a 30-hours-long gun battle. The fighters from Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabab group on Friday entered Hayat Hotel, frequented by government officials, after triggering explosions and gunfire. Now, security forces say they are now currently clearing explosives planted by fighters in the building. Now, Al-Shabab has officially claimed responsibility for the attack. It is the latest of its frequent attempts to strike places visited by government officials across Somalia. The attack on the hotel is the first major incident in Mogadishu since Somalia's new leader and president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, took office in May of this year. Now, the group also claimed similar attacks in Jowhar, the regional capital of Hirshabelle state, which saw dozens killed, with the aim of regional government officials of that federal member state. Now, a major offensive was also taken by Al-Shabab last month when fighters crossed into the neighboring region of Afder across the disputed border with Ethiopia. Now, Mohammed Abdurrahman, the director of Mogadishu's Medina Hospital, said that 40 people were admitted there with wounds and injuries from the attack, while 9 were sent home after getting treatment. 5 are currently in critical condition in intensive care unit, according to the hospital staff. Now, there was immediate silence from the Somali federal government for the initial 24 hours of the attack, which drew large-scale criticism from the Somali citizens that wanted more regular updates on events that were unfolding inside the hotel. Speaking to the media today, Chief of the Somali Police Force, General Hijar, told media outlets that the security operation in the hotel ended midnight local time last night. He further elucidated that 106 people were rescued from the hotel. However, the police chief refused to answer any further questions, particularly those regarding the details and what happened to the assailants. Now, the Somali Health Ministry released a statement today outlining the total casualties of the attack. Now, the official number from the government is 21 people were killed and 117 people were wounded, with 15 being in critical condition. Now, conversely, the militant group Al-Shabab claims they have killed 63 people during the attack, and went further to say that some of its fighters left the hotel unharmed and managed to flee, which has frightened Mogadishu residents. Normally, Al-Shabab fighters that are killed by the government are showcased to the public via public records such as Twitter handles and government websites as evidence of the operation conducted by security forces. However, this time around, Somali security forces have remained relatively quiet on the operation's details following this particular operation here going on, with no concrete evidence as to what exactly happened to the fighters that lay siege on the hotel. And currently, Somali media and the public are relying on 2 statements that are contradicting, which is one Al-Shabab statement claiming that militant fighters escaped, whereas the government forces claim that they've been killed. Now, during the initial attack on Friday, Al-Shabab fighters also fired mortars in the Hamar Jajab area of Mogadishu, which killed 4 civilians and wounded dozens more, including many children. However, operations against Al-Shabab across the country have been relatively successful, particularly in areas which have been recently liberated in Hiram, an Al-Shabab stronghold, and the group also suffered major defeat in Bakol and Afder in their attempts to attack Ethiopia. This is the 3rd major Al-Shabab attack on this scale in Mogadishu since 2019. Now, over into neighbouring Kenya, where elections were drawn to a close, but disputes regarding the results continue. Now, backtrack to August 9th, Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto won the election as the country's next president, according to the Electoral Commission. The results announcement was delayed for more than 2 hours past the constitutional deadline, and the country's Electoral Commission was split after 4 officials disowned the Commission's chairman, Wafulu Chebukati, results. Ruto won with 50.49% of the vote, narrowly defeating veteran opposition leader and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who was contesting his 5th election. He will become Kenya's 5th president, Mr. Ruto, since independence, winning the seat on his first attempt. Ruto's party, the Kenya First Coalition, has won a majority of seats in Kenya's Senate and the 2nd highest in the National Assembly of the lower house. The opposing officials staged a press conference of their own at another venue following the results to dispute the results. The IEBC's vice chair, Juliana Carrera, was among those who disagreed with the results but provided no evidence of irregularities. Odinga's chief agent, Conchori, told the press outside the National Election Centre in Nairobi that they had not been able to cross-check the final results with their own tally. Now, Raila Odinga himself described the results of the August 9th presidential elections as a travesty and warned of a long legal crisis facing Kenya's democracy. The dramatic series of events has raised fears of violence similar to what followed in disputed polls in Kenya in 2007 when more than 1,200 people were killed, and again in 2017 when more than 100 people were killed. So the question is, how does Kenya resolve presidential election disputes? Well, in 2010, a new constitution was approved outlining the procedures to be followed for settling the election disputes. It followed a disputed election in December 2007 when more than 1,200 people were killed in Kenya. The violence was partially blamed on the losing candidate's lack of trust in the courts at that time. The new constitution established a 7-member Supreme Court, whose duties include resolving presidential election disputes. So, what is the timeline of the disputes? Well, a person who appeals must submit their complaint to the Supreme Court within 7 days of the results being declared. The court next conducts a status conference with all parties to define the hearing schedule and ground rules. The constitution requires the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court of Kenya, to issue its decision within 14 days of the lawsuit being filed. Due to the tight schedule, it normally issues a summary judgment within 14 days, followed by more thorough decisions from each of the 7 judges at a later date. So now the question is, what could happen from this result? Well, when confronted with the presidential election petition, the court has 3 alternatives. If it finds sufficient grounds to call the legality of the result into the question, it can invalidate the election result and order a new election within 60 days. Or it can criticize the process but conclude that there were insufficient grounds to overturn the result. And finally, it can directly uphold the result of the election if it finds it was held in accordance with the Constitution. To reach a decision, the court may require a review of the ballots, including the recounts. Now, for instance, in the previous election in 2017, the court invalidated President Uhuru Kenyatta's original re-election, finding irregularities, particularly in the transmission of polling station results. And the court also took issue with the disparity in the number of votes casted for the president and other down-ballot elections, such as for members of parliament in a major verdict at the time. And the court has 14 days to respond. Now, the Malian government has accused France of violating its airspace and delivering weapons to armed groups, the latest in a barrage of accusations that have strained relations between Mali and the former colonial power of France. In a letter to the head of the United Nations Security Council dated Monday of this week, Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop said its airspace has been breached more than 50 times this year, mostly by French forces using drones, military helicopters, and fighter jets. These flagrant violations of Malian's airspace was used by France to collect information for terrorist groups operating in Sahel and to drop arms and ammunition to them, said the letter written by the Malian foreign minister. Now, in a response, the French embassy in Mali wrote on Twitter that France has, and I quote, obviously never supported directly or indirectly these terrorist groups, which remain as designated enemies across the planet. Now, France said that 53 French soldiers had died during its 9-year mission in Mali, and that France is committed to this cause, and it had killed hundreds of members of armed groups in order to improve the security situation for the average Malians. Now, Bamako, or Mali, has reportedly or repeatedly accused Paris of attempting to destabilize the country. Now, France this week Monday completed the withdrawal of its troops from Mali, ending a 9-year operation in the country at the center of the Sahel region's spiraling security crisis. We see a similar situation going on in Niger and Burkina Faso. Now, authorities in Bamako said they had evidence that France had supplied weapons to the armed groups, which Paris spent a decade and billions of dollars trying to defeat, but did not provide any evidence in the letter to the United Nations. And the accusations mark a new low in relations between Mali and the former colonial power, as Western powers see their influence slipping not just in the Sahel, but across the African continent. Now, Mali has had a tumultuous relationship with former international allies since the coup. Now, just simply a few weeks ago, Mali paused the UN mission in the country before restarting it earlier this month, citing issues with countries involved. Now, over into neighboring Chad, one of Chad's most prominent rebel leaders, Timan Erdimi, has returned to the country after 17 years in exile, days ahead of its start of the national talks aimed at paving the way for elections after the military seized power last year. Erdimi head of the Union of Resistance, or UFR, left Chad in 2005, and he had been living in exile in Qatar for at least a decade. His armed group had attempted to overthrow his uncle, Chad's former president Idriss Deby, first in 2008 and again in 2019. Failing to topple Deby in 2008, his UFR continued to threaten the government, and in 2019, the UFR-linked fighters advanced from Libya deep into the Chadian territory before their convoy was destroyed by French fighter jets. A second rebel leader, Mohamed Nouri, head of the Union for Democracy and Development, or UFDD, is also reported to be landing shortly after Erdimi. Nouri told local media that he's absolutely ready for dialogue. Now, hundreds gathered to welcome the rebel chief. He was wearing a white robe and a turban. Now, Chad's long-time president Deby was killed in the battlefield while visiting frontline troops in April last year, and his son Mohamed Idriss was installed by the military as interim president of Chad. And a younger Deby, 38, has initiated talks with various rebel groups who have long challenged his father's regime. At least 40 rebel and opposition factions signed a peace pact with Chad's transitional authorities just last week, agreeing to talks that are scheduled to begin on Saturday. However, the most powerful rebel group, the Libya-based Front for Change and Concord in Chad, or FACT, which threatened to march on the capital last year, has refused to participate in talks, saying negotiators did not listen to its demands. Now, Erdimi, rebel leader, will be a key participant at the Inclusive National Dialogue in the capital on Saturday, which will bring together 1,400 delegates from the military government, civil society, opposition parties, trade unions, and rebel groups. The dialogue should have started in February, but was repeatedly delayed as Chad's myriad rebel groups meeting in Qatar squabbled over whether to attend. And the current president has hailed it as a chance for reconciliation in a very, very fractured country, possibly opening the way for free and democratic elections. But this will all depend on how the major rebel group FACT, or the Front for Change and Concord in Chad, will react, because currently it has refused to take part in the talks. And for there to be peace in Mali, like any other Chad, like any other African country, there needs to be a consensus among all rebel groups, and there needs to be a common ground of understanding. And if one of the groups is not understanding, then the possibility of that rebel group continuing an insurgency in northern Chad from Libya will be a threat to stability in the country. However, it's more likely that the country, being more united, could possibly defeat these groups in the future. Now, new developments in Guinea, where Guinea's ruling military junta on Saturday appointed acting Prime Minister Bernard Djoumou to fill the position on a permanent basis, replacing Mohamed Bavougi, who has been absent since last month. The junta named Djoumou to serve as acting Prime Minister on July 17th. Now, officials said the former Prime Minister, Bavougi, who was appointed by the junta a month after it seized power in a coup in September, was receiving medical treatment. However, this has not been independently verified by any other person. Now, Djoumou, the current Prime Minister, previously served as Commerce and Industry Minister in the transitional government. His appointment as Prime Minister was announced in a statement read on a national television. The junta has faced deadly protests in recent weeks over its plans to stay in power for the next 3 years, and it has also received backlash from the West African Economic Community, which has continued to impose sanctions on the country. Currently, it's in negotiations with its West African neighbors over a possible shortening of that timeline. A number of people have been killed in protests in that country. Now, we'll continue to report events going on there. And finally, over to Nigeria, where the international airlines Emirates will suspend flights to Nigeria from next month over an inability to repatriate funds from Africa's most populous nation, the Dubai-based airline has said. Now, the decision on Thursday highlights the difficulties faced by international carriers that fly to Nigeria, which is one of the biggest markets in Africa. The African country has restricted access to foreign currency for imports and for investors seeking to repatriate their profits due to a shortage of dollars. Now, Nigeria gets about 90% of its foreign exchange from oil, but is struggling to produce due to pipeline theft and years of underinvestment. And the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, said in June that Nigeria was withholding $450 million in revenue that international carriers operating in the country had earned. And the Emirates said it had made no progress in efforts to initiate dialogue with relevant authorities for the urgent intervention. In a statement, Emirates Airline had taken difficult decisions, it said, to suspend all flights to and from Nigeria, effective from September 1st, 2022, to limit further losses and impact on our operations, it said. And that is all the stories on this week's program. Please tune in next week for another weekly update of events across the African continent.